you were gonna get caught. That's something I wasn't expecting.
The algorithm, as it were, right? The invisible hand moves.
My gender transition came from more.
And I'm like, sorry, you're a joke. You're a joke to me.
Do you get extra points if Bugsy triggered a nightmare? How's it going? Welcome to my channel. Today I have something really exciting. I have an interview with Rafael Frumkin. Recently published his book, Bugsy and Other Stories, which was a fantastic read. And these other books here. He is trans, he is a wonderful writer, he's a tenured professor, and I had the honor of speaking to them. So without further ado, enjoy. I wanted to give my honest thoughts on the book, Bugsy and Other Stories. Bugsy, I think what struck me the most, and I talked to Rafael about this a little bit, for me it was the authenticity of Bugsy's character. The prose almost felt like reading from a journal. At the same time, it was well crafted and the story was compelling and it was moving forward. Bugsy felt like a friend who was confiding in me, telling me these stories, telling me of their life, and I could relate to their spoilers ahead, their confusion, their falling for someone, their questioning their sexuality. I think they were a friend, and their story was captivating.
For me, really, like a story like Bugsy, it's so funny, Maya, that you say like Bugsy sounds like a friend, right? I'm writing about a friend because that's how Bugsy feels, right? Even though like Bugsy, I would not say Bugsy is me or anyone I know, right? But at the same time, I would say that they are me and everyone I know. And that's the kind of beauty of fiction, right? Is that you can have these characters who are either proxies for yourself, they don't resemble you, but they're out in your like imaginary world, right? And they're living through stuff that sort of helps you understand your own experience better, or they're amalgamations of like yourself, your friends, like people you've known, people, some a story you read, and or saw on the news or whatever. It's so cool how there's almost like this quicksilver like quality, right, where the character can dissolve into a puddle and then reconstitute themselves into something entirely different. So for Bugsy, I think like it made it, I think, easier for me to stay like really emotionally immediate, right, and like be in those kinds of like whew, super intense places that they were in, while also having enough distance and lucidity to like be like, okay, like I'm gonna have prose actually be, serviceable. Like I'm not gonna just blah, go nuts. I think what allowed me to do that was all of the stuff that Bugsy's going through. All of that stuff is stuff that I had metabolized, whether there were traces of it in my own life or the lives of people I knew, or whether it was just stuff, as I said, I had read about or explored on my own at a different time. I was able to be like, oh, I've metabolized this years ago. And that was the case for my second book as well. I had metabolized queer yearning stuff and was not like in the throes of it. So that made it easier, right, to kind of bring the emotion, but not let it just take the reins.
And with the unreliable narrator, the edges of reality started to get really blurry. And that's something I found in a lot of the stories. It was really captivating. And I lost myself a little bit. And by the end of it, I didn't know what was reality and what wasn't reality.
You could have tipped over, right, to the point and be like, well, Bugsy's a secret agent. The reader is the one who doesn't fully understand Bugsy, whom everyone's looking at and calling crazy, actually gets it. The really rough thing about like having experienced paranoia or having been close to someone who is experiencing a kind of paranoia is, wow, the stuff that like some white coated doctor will inject you full of thorazine and tell you you're delusional about. There's way more, truth to it, whether it's like there are elements that are happening in the world, right? Or more often, it's meaningful for you personally. You know what I mean? So in the case of Bugsy, they're having this like really intense delusion. The truth and the paranoia in that case is Bugsy's very ashamed. Bugsy's very ashamed of like their queerness, their desires, and I think it comes out in, well, this must be taboo. This must be taboo, and we're gonna get arrested for this taboo. And that's how the paranoia manifests.
But
And I
his
think
parents
it's
said, really,
sorry.
her parents were the one that brought that into the her father, Jesus Christ.
They're the ones who are just sort of like, we can't even conceive of you being like close to this. And that's just gonna shame Bugsy more, right? And queer people by extension.
How do you go from having a Word doc and being like, I think this can be a story?
I talk with my students a lot about this concept of the poetic trigger because I teach students who are writing in all kinds of genres, not just fiction writers, but poets as well. The poetic trigger, it's this concept of the image or the thought or the half formed concept, right? The fragment that triggers one to write a poem. And it could be as arcane as, wow, I saw a dead garden snake and I must write a poem. For the short story, it's a very similar thing. It's how do I go from the gesture? I don't know. I just had this thought, right? I'm thinking of talking to my friend Maya in a coffee shop and we're having a great talk. And then all of a sudden in comes a lizard man, right? And it's like, that's an interesting scene, right? Here's a lizard man. We're having a conversation. But where do I go from there, right? Like, how do I parlay that into an actual narrative that other people want to read? The way you asked the question, I thought was quite perceptive because you were like, you essentially said, like, how do you get in that brain space? Like, how do you get in the mental state where you can develop this idea, the poetic trigger, whatever, this image into a full on story? I think it's like, it's tricky. It's a matter of scaffolding. And for me, I used to be like really craft focused. I used to be like, okay, I must like create these scenes and the sentences must be beautiful and this and this and this. And I've actually changed up my method and it's a little more mystical now. I think that to develop an idea into a full on story, you should be less concerned with, okay, well, what's going to make it appealing and what's going to do this and what should this character be doing and will the reader be annoyed if I kill this character off or this character is immature, whatever. No, you need to be asking yourself, oh, why am I compelled by this scene where a lizard man bursts into the coffee shop? Why is that interesting to me? I have an exercise on my Substack, write the story of your dreams. And what it is you go into a dream that you had, right? You recall a dream you had, and then you build it out into a short story, right? You become the POV character, and then you write the short story of the dream. You do what a lot of TV writers do, and you write past the dream, right? When writers develop books into series, oftentimes season 1 and season 2 exhaust the book, so they write past the book. You write past the dream. And that's what I tell people to do is like, this compelled you, right? Whether it's a dream fragment, right? Or just an image or an idea or whatever. What's way more important than the architecture of the piece is why it compelled you. That will get you so much farther than just like, I need to make a good story. And that actually will get you in the mental space that I think you want to be in.
Do you get extra points if Bugsy triggered a nightmare? I had a really bad dream where I was paranoid. It was late at night. I just finished the story, and then I had this terrible nightmare. And then I woke up and I was still in the dream a couple times. That happens to me a lot. And what is life and what is dream and what is reality? Writing something for you, not trying to guess what thousands of people like and finding the people who like what you like. I found that all my characters were women before I came out. I wondered how gender plays a role or doesn't play a role. Is it more about the character? Did you use writing as a way to explore your gender, maybe early on?
And this is why I really appreciate queer and trans interviewers asking me these questions. Yes, I was just like you, where I was just like, oh my gosh, all of my characters are men, 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 men. Like they're just like endlessly men. And, or, like young boys and coming of age. But it was interesting. I'd be curious to see if you found this as well in your writings, pre-transition writings. Yes, it was men, but it wasn't like the sort of like standard image of a man, right? It wasn't the kind of like John Wayne rugged individualist thing. It was images of masculinity as I understood it, or as I would come to inhabit it later on. Namely, this kind of fey, gay, soft masculinity, if one can even call it that, right? I think masculinity has been co-opted in some ways and in many ways, right? Obviously by patriarchy, but I think like the queer reclamation of masculinity, the feminine reclamation of masculinity, that's what I'm interested in. And so that's what I was doing before I think I even realized it, right? Was this sort of like this weak, right? That's the pejorative, but it really was just sort of these men who knew themselves in ways that men typically aren't allowed to know themselves or sort of think about themselves. So that was going on a lot. But then I had a period in my early 20s where I was like really resisting transness and was like leaning super hard. I was like, oh, I'm going to really just like be a cis girl and be really femme. And during this time, I received in workshop feedback. I still think it's so funny to this day. I had written a scene about, will later on be featured in my first novel, about just like these like two dudes dudes in college, and they've like taken a bunch of shrooms. It's kind of a silly scene, and it's just kind of a played for laughs scene. But people were so serious about it, and they're like, "Where are the women? Where are the women? This is a white man imitation." And I was like, "What? What? Okay." And it was just a weird move. I was just sort of like, feels like you're trying to say something here. But I remember being kind of unseated by that in some odd ways, and then not quite knowing what to do, and feeling like I was like tripping like internalized misogyny wires and stuff. So really, to get to the point, Bugsy has characters of like quite a lot of genders. You know, like Bugsy has like cis women POV characters. Bugsy is kind of like an NB, vaguely trans mask, but largely NB character. Got Dina and Garrett, like it subscribes. You got a lot of just different folks. I felt that I had been around the bend gender wise by the time I actually sat down to write that. Once you've transitioned and once you're just moving through the world in the gender that you like really were, oh, I aspire to be this, to be perceived as such, right? And now everyone's perceiving you as such. And then you have to be like, oh shit, that's right. I am in fact being seen this way. And that's its whole own trippy experience. It's kind of cool, right? Because it allows you as a writer to move more freely, literally from your subjecthood, right? You have now been perceived and treated as like different genders, different people, essentially. It makes writing from those diverse perspectives more easy. It's been wild. It's been more of a struggle to accept, yes, there is dudeliness in me and about me, and like I am a guy and some, but like that's trickier to accept for me really than just like, oh my god, I'm this weird little alien and I'm like really femme and gay. Ah. And I think that side of things comes obviously, right, with a good deal of social risk, but I've been lucky enough to kind of safeguard myself against like those sort of social situations where maybe that would be trickier. I'm a weird trans person, and that a very weird trans person. And then I'm constantly flinging around my dead name. I'm like, here's a pre-transition picture. This is me, but very lovingly, right? And I think, Maya, your question gets at something that's so important to me as a writer. When you say, like, is it easier to just put on a skirt to write a cis female character because gender is a construct, right? Like, I think essential to transness, right? I wish that instead of marking like female, male, or non binary on my driver's license, I could just mark like trans, which would be dangerous. But it's because I think that is a more epistemically rich category than any of those. Well, non binary is pretty rich, but like I think the binary is certainly not, because transness is about subversion, and transness is about being everything at once and knowing, just as you're saying, that gender is a construct, right? If I've already really fucked with patriarchy by being like, yo, I can just like inject testosterone, be a man. Sorry, it's not a God given right. But I fuck with it even more if I do that and then put on a skirt. And then patriarchy's like, what? Like, what? And I'm like, sorry, you're a joke. You know, you're a joke to me. And so I think that we, as trans writers and queer writers, we are not given enough of an opportunity to talk about the joy. And sometimes we really are, but we don't even give ourselves that opportunity, because there is such joy to being trans and queer. I mean, it's one of the, pretty much my favorite thing about myself, you know, is my transness. And building trans community has been such a joy. And, you know, meeting, you know, like wonderful folks like you who are like, I get it. This kind of stuff, when it shows up in art and it shows up in culture, I'm like, let's venerate that. I totally understand that we do need to commemorate folks, you know, whom we've lost to transphobia and homophobia. We need to like continue advance, you know, resist our goals for like a more equitable and safe lives. But there's quite a lot of joy. There's quite a lot of joy that I think is not getting enough of a spotlight. I don't know. If you're in like a really cool trans and queer fashion show, let's blast that all over the internet. You know what I mean? Like, that's joyful.
Yeah, I could just so many ways. My gender transition came from more from euphoria than dysphoria. Search, do I have to hate my body to be trans? No.
So many people search that, Maya. So many people
Yeah.
search that. I
Yeah.
know.
It's I don't want to get a bajillion surgeries. I like hormones. It's cool. I find joy, and my transition was so much about joy. And I've been loving queer stories and trans stories that, you know, if you're trans or not isn't the conflict. The conflict is how you go out into the world, right? What we need in trans art is that joy, because it's right. That's what's missing. I was gonna ask you what's missing from trans literature.
Yeah, that's like I totally agree. It's interesting, right? Because it's like it's not as if it's like we're not creating, right? Like so many trans creators are wanting to advance this message, I think, right? But I think ultimately the stumbling block here is that we are making this art, under capitalism, following a sort of set of metrics that kind of deprioritize trans happiness, right? And prioritize trans suffering. The algorithm, as it were, right? The invisible hand moves the sad story forward, right? And takes the happy story away from the viewer or the reader or whatever. And I think I think it's out there, right? Well, I know it's out rather, but it is harder to find.
To wrap it up, like overall, the stories were striking and unstable like their characters. They were intimate, they were close, they were your best friend, they were your lover, they were your sister, your brother, your sibling. And then all of a sudden, the edges began to blur and began to fade, and you thought you were walking down a path. You thought someone broke into your house, and all of a sudden you were stabbing yourself. You were living in delusion. You were stuck in your mind. You were trapped. The police, the FBI was following you. You were gonna get caught. That's something I wasn't expecting. To have the characters inform the writing style. I think usually, as someone who is working on a couple novels and loves to write, I've made some short films. I usually think of character and plot, obviously connected insofar as the characters bring the plot to life. They're related the way numbers are related to math, or water is to a riverbed. They're linked, but they aren't the same. And a riverbed is a good analogy, because this is kind of like letting the water, the characters, shape the riverbed, the shape of the story. So that was really beautiful and I guess disorienting. And when a book is disorienting, I think good writing works like a good stand-up joke where it like subverts your expectations. It wasn't comfy, calm. I think sometimes writers don't really go outside of what they're comfy with. It's like easy to stick to what's comfortable. It's easy to have characters that are flawed but ultimately have a heart of gold. And so many of the characters here were just horrible people. It made you uncomfortable. The writing would start gently, innocently, and then all of a sudden demons would come out of it. It's almost like mental illness itself was informing how the writing worked. Keep writing. I'm enjoying reading and then listening. I'm a dyslexic, so it's a lot easier to hear books.
So the best place to get the book, I would say bookshop.org. Bookshop.org really is a great place to get it. Yeah, just, search my name, search Bugsy. I mean, they should have all the different formats.
Go read the book. It's good. I could relate a lot to that. I could relate a lot to you as a person, not just the writing. And I'm inspired to go write.
I thought your questions were excellent, and anyone who gives me a chance to talk about trans joy, I'm gonna take that chance. That makes me so happy, and it was a total pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. If you have any more questions or any other authors you think I should interview, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you next time. Bye.